Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get you the core knowledge you need. Today, we're really focusing in on supply chain risk.
Yeah, it's huge in this super connected world we live in, understanding and, managing the security of vendors, partners. It's not just important anymore. It's fundamental.
Absolutely. And for you, the learner tuning in, our aim is to give you insights that are clear, actionable, without drowning you in technical jargon.
Exactly. We want you to leave this conversation with a really solid grasp of the threats out there, and maybe more importantly, how you can start building resilience against them.
Okay, so to do that, we've gathered some key resources. We'll be looking at a CISA advisory, specifically one about the CL0P ransomware attacks.
That's a big one. And we've also got an article from RoboAI that talks about continuous supply chain monitoring, a more proactive approach.
And finally, we're digging into the big guide from NIST on cybersecurity supply chain risk management practices, sort of the foundational text.
Right. These three sources really give us a good range. We've got a real-world attack, the nitty-gritty of how it happened, then we have proactive defense strategies, and finally, that comprehensive framework for managing risk long-term.
Okay, let's get into it then. Starting with that tangible threat, the CL0P ransomware group, and how they hit the MOVEit software.
Yeah, the CISO advisory is pretty detailed on this. So CL0P, they found a specific weakness, CVE 2023-34362, in MOVEit transfer software. Lots of organizations use MOVEit, right?
Right, very common.
And their way in, their initial access was through something called SQL injection. That's tech term T1190.
SQL injection. Okay, break that down a bit. What does that actually let an attacker do?
Right, so think of it like this. MOVEit, like loads of software, uses a database. SQL is just the language used to talk to that database. And SQL injection flaw means the attackers can basically trick the software.
Trick it how?
They can make it run database commands it really shouldn't.
Yeah.
So they bypass normal security checks and get access to sensitive stuff stored in that database. It's like whispering secret commands to the system.
Wow. Okay. That sounds, incredibly dangerous. And the the advisory says once they were in, the consequences were pretty severe.
Oh, definitely. We're talking massive data theft. And the classic ransomware playbook. Sending demands directly to company executives, putting the pressure on.
Yeah, they mentioned the CL0P data leak site too, where they threaten to just dump the stolen data if they don't get paid.
Exactly. The advisory even shows an example ransom note, one aimed at Go Anywhere MFT users, which face similar issues. It's very direct, very aggressive. You can see the intent is just to create panic and force that payment.
And they didn't just steal data and leave, right? The advisory talks about malware.
Right. That's where it gets interesting. After that initial breach, they used a couple of tools, RAT's remote access Trojans, specifically Flawed Emmy and Flawed Grace.
RATs. So like digital remote controls.
Right. Pretty much, yeah. They let the attackers poke around the compromised systems, steal information, and importantly, set up communication back to their own servers. That's the command and control, or C2 part. T1071 and T1015 cover those techniques.
So they basically set up shop inside the network. Hidden listening posts kind of thing.
You got it. And then they used another RAT called SDBot. This one was more about spreading the infection further inside the network, creating hidden backdoors so they could get back in later. That's T1059.001.
And making sure they stayed in.
Yes, exactly. Ensuring persistence. They used a technique called application shimming for that, T1546.011. Persistence just means they make sure they can survive reboots, maybe even if the initial entry point gets fixed. It's layered, shows they know what they're doing.
It sounds sophisticated. But the advisory also gives defenders something to work with, right? These YIRA rules?
Yes, absolutely. YIRA rules are super valuable. They're like custom search patterns. Security tools can use them to scan files or network traffic for specific strings of text or code that are known signs of this particular attack.
Like specific fingerprints?
Kind of, yeah. The advisory mentions things like looking for MOVEit.dmz or a specific header like request.headers xsilot comment. If your tools spot those, it's a big red flag.
And beyond just code snippets, there are also IOCs, indicators of compromise.
Correct. Those are the broader digital footprints. File hashes, for example, unique signatures for known bad files, like they list one for avicaptures.dll, and also the IP addresses of those command and control servers the malware talks to.
So you can block those IPs.
Exactly. Block communication to those IPs and hunt for those specific file hashes inside your network. The advisory lists several IPs to look out for. It's actionable intelligence.
Okay, so MOVEit transfer. a tool lots of companies rely on, became the weak link exploited by CL0P. It really drives home how interconnected everything is in the supply chain.
That's the absolute key takeaway. For many victims, they weren't the direct target initially, MOVEit was, but a flaw in their supplier's software became their critical vulnerability. It just cascades.
Which highlights why things like zero trust are so important. Assuming breach, constantly verifying.
Precisely. You can't just trust implicitly anymore. If you want to learn more about actually implementing zero trust, www.zerotrustciso.com is a great resource. Check them out.
Definitely worth looking into. So that's the threat landscape, or at least one major example. How can organizations get more proactive? Let's shift to that RoboAI article and this idea of continuous monitoring.
Right. This article really pushes for moving away from just reacting to incidents and towards, well, being proactive. Continuous monitoring means using automated systems, basically keeping a constant eye on your suppliers and vendors in real time.
Like a sort of always-on radar for risks in your partner network. What kinds of risks are we talking about?
While the article gives good examples, these systems can scan news, public data, looking for red flags about your suppliers, things like maybe new sanctions are imposed on them, or even reports about unethical practices like modern slavery in their own supply chain.
So it's broader than just cybersecurity risks. It's overall business risk.
Exactly. Reputation, operational disruption. It all ties together. And these systems can also flag more mundane but still critical things like maybe a supplier's compliance certification is about to expire. You get an alert before it becomes a problem.
Makes sense. Ensures you're consistently working with partners who meet the standards you need.
Yeah. So the article frames continuous monitoring not just as a security thing, but really as a strategic move. It helps mitigate risk, sure, but also helps optimize operations, make better decisions faster, and ultimately stay competitive.
And RoboAI themselves, the article mentions, they have software in this space.
They do. They talk about their supplier risk management software. It uses AI for risk assessment and combines it with that continuous monitoring piece. The whole goal is to help companies systematically identify, evaluate, and then, mitigate vendor risks, strengthen compliance, protect the business.
Sounds like a necessary capability these days, given the complexity. Okay, so we've seen the attack. We've seen a proactive monitoring approach. Yeah. Let's get into the big picture strategy with that NIST guidance on CSCRM.
Right. NIST Special Publication 800-161 Revision 1. It's pretty much the definitive guide. It lays out a systematic process, CSCRM, cybersecurity supply chain risk management, for managing these cyber risks across your whole supply chain. Identifying them, assessing them, responding to them.
So it's about embedding security thinking into how you deal with suppliers, right from the start and all the way through.
Exactly. And NIST talks about it in layers, 3 levels of risk management. Level 1 is enterprise-wide. Level 2 is mission and business process. And level 3 is down at the operational level. Each has different roles, different responsibilities.
Could you give a quick sense of who's at each level?
Sure. Level 1, enterprise, that's your top leadership. CEO, CISO, Chief Procurement Officer, they set the strategy, policy, budget. Level 2, mission business, that's like your program managers, system owners. They tailor the big strategy to their specific areas.
And level 3?
That's the front line. IT admins, security analysts, procurement folks actually doing the day-to-day implementation of the security practices. Table 2.1 in the NIST doc breaks down the stakeholders really well.
So it really needs buy-in and action from top to bottom.
Absolutely. And NIST is clear. C-SCRM isn't some separate silo. It has to be woven into your main enterprise risk management. They mention aligning with NIST SP 839, for instance. It's a cycle. Frame the risk, assess it, respond, and then monitor continuously. Figure 2.1 shows that cycle.
The guide also mentions fit for purpose for products and services. What's that about in this context?
It basically means when you buy something or use a service, you need to make sure it doesn't just do the job functionally, but also meets your security requirements, your quality standards, your resilience needs. You're evaluating the supplier's ability to deliver securely over time.
So thinking beyond just the initial features or price tag, looking at the whole security lifecycle.
Precisely. And NIST emphasizes integrating CSCRM into every step of acquisition, planning, requirements, market research, evaluating proposals, managing the contract. Security needs to be there from day one.
Sounds like it requires a lot of teamwork across different departments.
It definitely does. NIST calls it a shared responsibility model. You need input from info security, procurement, legal, engineering, operations, a diverse team.
And they categorize the practices too, right? Foundational, sustaining, enhancing.
That's right. It gives organizations a kind of maturity path to follow to build up their C-SCRM capabilities. And there are practical resources too, like templates for C-SCRM policies and plans in Appendix D. Very helpful starting points.
That's useful. The guide also links to specific security controls in NIST 853, tailoring them for supply chain.
Yes, Appendix A does that mapping. It provides supplemental guidance. For example, AC3, access enforcement, but thinking about it across the whole supply chain. Or AT2, security awareness training, but making sure it covers supply chain threats specifically.
What else stands out there?
AU16, cross-organizational audit logging, needing to coordinate logs with your providers. CM5, access restrictions for change, especially thinking about third-party software libraries. And SI7, software integrity, making sure you get software from trusted sources.
That SI7 one sounds critical, especially after talking about MOVEit.
Totally. And under provenance, Control SR4, they discuss the software bill of materials, or SBOM. Think of it like an ingredients list for software. Shows all the components. Huge for transparency and finding vulnerabilities faster.
Yeah, that transparency feels like a game changer potentially.
It really could be. NIST also brings up FASTDoc. That's the Federal Acquisition Supply Chain Security Act. It mandates doing supply chain risk assessments, or SQRAs. Table E1 in the NIST doc lists baseline risk factors to consider for STRAs.
What kind of factors?
Things like the supplier's governance, their financial stability, past performance, quality control, but also stuff like foreign ownership, control, or influence FOCI. It's a broad look.
So it's technical security, but also business viability and even geopolitical stuff.
Exactly. It's holistic. Appendix B talks about threat sources, adversarial like hackers, systemic like process failures, environmental, accidental. And Appendix E has examples of vulnerabilities like counterfeit parts entering the supply chain. Scenario 2 in Table C3 gives that example.
It paints a very complex picture. Seems like navigating this, finding the right partners, assessing them properly, that takes expertise.
It certainly does. And if you're looking for that kind of expertise or specific cybersecurity solutions and services to help implement frameworks like NIST, check out www.cisomarketplace.services. It's a good place to find vetted providers.
Good resource. And NIST provides structure for the assessment itself, too.
Yes, they include a risk exposure framework in Table C1 and lay out the steps for risk assessment in Appendix C. It gives organizations a methodology to actually do the assessment.
Okay, this NIST guidance is clearly comprehensive. Let's bring it back to reality with another major incident. SolarWinds. That really shook things up.
Oh, absolutely. SolarWinds was, a textbook example of a devastating software supply chain attack. The source we looked at mentions it hit potentially 18,000 organizations worldwide. The scale was just massive.
18,000. That's staggering. And it wasn't just random collateral damage, right? They had specific targets.
No, definitely not random. The attackers used a backdoor, famously known as Sunburst, which was slipped into SolarWinds Orion software updates. And they used that access to go after high-profile victims, U.S. federal agencies, major tech companies, critical infrastructure, very targeted follow-on attacks.
Really shows the potential reach and impact when a trusted software provider is compromised. What were the big lessons learned from the response?
Well, one huge challenge highlighted in the source was insufficient logging. Many of the victims just didn't have the detailed logs they needed to figure out exactly what the attackers did, how far they got, what data was taken. You can't respond effectively if you can't see what happened.
Underscores basic security hygiene, doesn't it? Logging is fundamental.
Absolutely. And the source also stresses having a well-thought-out and, importantly, tested incident response plan. Plus, the whole incident really forced a hard look at how organizations manage risk related to their software suppliers. Strengthening that oversight became critical.
Which neatly brings us back to assessing vendor risk. Our last source talked about automating that process.
Right. Because doing vendor risk assessments manually, well, it's tough. It takes a huge amount of time, especially if you have hundreds or thousands of vendors. It's hard to be consistent, prone to human error, and you might only scratch the surface.
So automation, using specialized tools and platforms, helps fix that.
That's the idea. Automated security questionnaires, risk scoring platforms, they streamline the whole thing.
Sure.
You send out standardized questionnaires, collect evidence, track responses, score risks automatically.
Sounds much more efficient.
It is. The benefits mentioned are better efficiency, but also a potentially stronger security posture because assessments are more consistent and thorough. It helps with compliance reporting too. And you can actually measure things like how quickly assessments get done, how many risks you find proactively.
That proactive piece seems key. Catching issues before they turn into a SolarWinds or MOVEit situation.
Exactly. Automation allows for more frequent, more consistent checks, reducing the chance that something slips through the cracks, like it might with slower manual processes. Of course, the source notes you need to choose the right tools for your needs.
Okay, so pulling it all together. We've seen the stark reality of sophisticated attacks like CL0P and SolarWinds targeting the supply chain. We know proactive steps like continuous monitoring, as the RoboAI piece discussed, are vital. And we have comprehensive frameworks like NIST's C-SCRM to provide that structured, long-term approach to managing these complex risks.
That sums it up pretty well. Understanding these pieces, the threats, the proactive defenses, the strategic frameworks, and then actually implementing relevant practices, it's just essential now for building resilience. It's not optional anymore.
And it feels like a continuous process, right? Not a one-and-done thing. You have to keep adapting as the threats change.
Absolutely. Constant vigilance, continuous improvement.
So maybe a final thought then for you, the learner, to take away. How can everyone, really, regardless of their technical background, play a part in making our supply chain stronger and more secure?
That's a great question.
Think about, just being vigilant, sharing information when appropriate, and maybe most importantly, demanding better security from the vendors you rely on, whether it's at work or even personally.
Yeah, those actions, they might seem small individually, but collectively, they really can make a difference. Raising the bar for everyone contributes to a more secure ecosystem overall.
Well, this has been incredibly informative, really digging into a critical topic. Thanks for walking us through it.
My pleasure. It's important stuff.
And a big thank you again to our sponsors who make this possible, www.zerotrustciso.com and www.cisomarketplace.services. We really encourage you, the learner, to explore the resources we talked about today. Think about how they apply to your situation and consider what actions you can take.
Stay curious, stay informed.
Until our next deep dive, keep learning and stay secure.